You sit down, ready to work. You tell yourself, just a few minutes. You open the document. Then you pause. You check something small. You wait for the right feeling to arrive. And somehow, an hour disappears. You don't think of yourself as lazy. You care. You plan. You want to do better. But this cycle keeps repeating. Waiting, preparing, postponing. You promise that tomorrow will be different, that next time you'll feel motivated enough to focus. And every time it doesn't happen, something uncomfortable settles in. Frustration, quiet guilt, that familiar thought. What's wrong with me? Here's the part no one really says out loud. The longer you wait for motivation, the harder it becomes to start. Not because you lack discipline, but because each delay teaches your brain that avoidance is safer than action. So you plan more, you think more, you wait more. And the gap between who you want to be and what you actually do starts to feel heavier. This video isn't here to shame you or push you harder. It's here to explain why this pattern keeps pulling you back, even when you genuinely want to move forward. By the end of this, you won't be wondering how to force focus anymore. You'll understand why waiting for motivation has been quietly working against you, and what actually needs to change for focus to become possible again. And once you see that clearly, the way you approach starting anything will never feel the same. The belief that motivation must come before action feels logical. It feels kind. It feels reasonable. You tell yourself you're just waiting for the right moment, the right energy, the right mood. Once motivation shows up, you'll start. And because that belief sounds so sensible, you rarely question it. But that belief is the problem. When you assume motivation comes first, every lack of action turns into a personal judgment. You start thinking you're undisciplined, inconsistent, or somehow broken. You don't see it as a faulty sequence. You see it as a flaw in yourself. And that's where the self-blame quietly grows. The truth is, this belief wasn't born inside you. You learned it from advice that said, follow your passion. From productivity culture that glorified bursts of inspiration. From watching people talk about motivation as if it were something you either have or don't. So when you sit down to work and feel nothing, you assume something is missing. You wait. You hesitate. You postpone. Think about how this usually plays out. You plan to start, but you don't feel ready. You wait for clarity. You wait for confidence. You wait to feel more focused. And while you're waiting, the task becomes heavier. The pressure builds. Starting feels even harder than before. Not because the work changed, but because the waiting taught your brain that action requires a special emotional state. Seeing this clearly matters because it changes how you talk to yourself. Instead of asking, why can't I just focus like everyone else? You start asking, what if motivation isn't the starting point at all? That shift alone removes a layer of shame. It replaces confusion with clarity, and it opens the door to a different way of beginning, one that doesn't depend on feeling ready first. Motivation doesn't arrive to start the engine. It shows up after the engine is already running. That's the part most people get backwards. You think motivation creates movement, but in reality, movement creates motivation. Action comes first. The feeling follows. This matters because it gives control back to you. If motivation had to come first, you'd always be dependent on your mood. Some days you'd be lucky. Most days you'd be stuck. But when you understand that motivation is a response to action, not a requirement for it, focus stops feeling like something you're waiting for and starts feeling like something you can build. Think about how this works in real life. You don't start with energy. You start with resistance. You sit down feeling tired, unfocused, maybe even annoyed. But you open the file anyway. You write one rough sentence. You read one page. You do one small, imperfect step. Nothing magical happens at first. But after a few minutes, something shifts. Your mind settles slightly. The task feels less threatening. Momentum begins to form. That shift isn't motivation appearing out of nowhere. It's your brain responding to evidence. Evidence that you are already in motion. Evidence that starting didn't destroy you. Evidence that the task is survivable. Motivation is your system catching up to what your behavior already proved. When you wait to feel motivated, you're asking your brain to predict safety before it has proof. When you act first, even gently, you give it proof. And once the proof is there, motivation doesn't need to be forced. It emerges naturally, as a side effect of engagement. This is why starting with imperfect energy works. You don't need confidence. You don't need excitement. You just need a small movement that tells your brain, we're already doing this. From there, focus becomes less about how you feel and more about what you're already in the middle of doing. Focus doesn't collapse because you suddenly run out of willpower. It collapses because, on some level, your actions are staying loyal to an identity you've been carrying for a long time. You don't just decide what to do in the moment. You act in ways that feel consistent with who you believe you are. If deep down you see yourself as someone who needs motivation to begin, then waiting feels natural. It feels honest. Starting without that feeling feels wrong, almost like you're pretending to be someone else. So when you say, I'm not the kind of person who can work without motivation, you're not making an excuse. You're protecting a self-image that has been reinforced over time. This is why tactics alone don't stick. You can learn techniques, schedules, or systems, but if they clash with your identity, they fade the moment things feel uncomfortable. Identity always wins over strategy. And the good news is, identity isn't fixed. It's shaped quietly, through repetition. Every time you delay until you feel ready, you reinforce the belief that motivation must come first. Every time you take a small step without feeling ready, you send a different signal. You're not trying to become a completely new person overnight. You're just collecting evidence for a slightly different version of yourself. Think about what actually changes identity. It's not intensity. It's not big breakthroughs. It's consistency. One small action taken in an unmotivated state does more to reshape identity than a perfect, high-energy day ever could. Because it proves something specific, that you are capable of starting without permission from your mood. When focus becomes an identity shift instead of a willpower battle, pressure drops. You stop asking, do I feel like doing this? And start asking, what would the kind of person I'm becoming do next? That question is quieter, steadier, and far more reliable. Over time, those small, repeated answers build an identity that no longer depends on motivation to move.
Waiting feels safe because it delays discomfort. As long as you're planning, preparing, or thinking things through, you haven't failed yet. You haven't been exposed. You haven't tested your limits. In that space, nothing can go wrong, and your brain reads that as protection. This is why waiting is so convincing. It doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels responsible. You tell yourself you're being thoughtful, strategic, careful. You outline the work instead of starting it. You refine the plan instead of taking the first step. And in the moment, that choice lowers tension. The discomfort fades. just a little. But that relief comes at a cost. When you plan instead of act, you avoid the immediate discomfort of effort, uncertainty, or imperfection. At the same time, you teach your brain that action is dangerous and delay is safe. The more often you do this, the stronger that pattern becomes. Starting begins to feel heavier, not lighter. Not because you're incapable, but because your system has learned what to avoid. Seeing this clearly reduces resistance. It reframes avoidance as a natural response, not a moral failure. You're not procrastinating because you're careless or unmotivated. You're doing it because your brain is trying to protect you from discomfort it doesn't yet know how to tolerate. The shift happens when you reinterpret that discomfort. Instead of seeing it as a warning sign, you start seeing it as a growth signal. That tight feeling before you begin doesn't mean something is wrong. It means you're stepping outside a familiar pattern. It means you're about to do something new. When discomfort becomes information instead of a threat, waiting loses its grip. You don't need to eliminate the urge to delay. You just need to stop letting that urge make decisions for you. And that's when action, even small action, starts to feel safer than staying stuck.
The real shift happens when motivation stops being the engine and momentum takes its place. Motivation is emotional and unpredictable. Momentum is mechanical. Once it's moving, it wants to keep moving. And unlike motivation, it doesn't ask how you feel before it shows up. Momentum begins small, almost uncomfortably small. A single sentence, 5 minutes, one imperfect attempt. These actions don't look impressive, which is why they're often dismissed. But they have one critical advantage. They're repeatable. And repetition is what turns effort into rhythm. When you start small and continue consistently, something changes beneath the surface. Focus stops being a fragile state you have to protect. It becomes a byproduct of staying engaged. You don't need to hype yourself up each time. You don't need to convince yourself this matters. You're already in motion, and staying in motion requires less effort than starting over again. This is what makes focus sustainable. You're no longer depending on emotional peaks to carry you forward. You're relying on continuity. One action links to the next. One day connects to the next. And even when energy dips, momentum carries you through because stopping would require more effort than continuing. Notice how simple this is. There's no system to memorize, no trick to optimize. Just the decision to value continuation over intensity. You don't ask, "Can I do this perfectly today?" You ask, "What's the smallest version of this I can continue?" Over time, that consistency compounds. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily. And as it compounds, focus becomes less dramatic too. It feels quieter, more ordinary, less like a battle and more like a habit. When momentum replaces motivation, you stop chasing the right feeling and start trusting the process of showing up. And once that trust is built, focus no longer depends on how inspired you are. It depends on the simple fact that you're already moving.
At this point, a quiet resistance usually shows up. You might be thinking, asterisk, this sounds reasonable, but it won't work for me. Or, asterisk, other people can do this. I'm different. Asterisk. Not because you're lazy. Not because you don't understand. But because you've tried before. You started, lost momentum, and ended up back in the same place. And each time that happened, it added another layer of doubt. That reaction makes sense. When something hasn't worked in the past, your mind learns to protect you from trying again. It lowers expectations. It keeps you cautious. It says, asterisk, don't get your hopes up. Asterisk, that's not weakness. That's self-protection. But here's the reframe that matters. The discomfort you feel when starting isn't a sign that something is wrong with you. It's a signal that you're doing something new while your identity is still catching up. Your nervous system prefers what's familiar, not what's effective. So when you act outside your old patterns, it creates friction. That friction is not failure. It's alignment in progress. Focus isn't built by forcing yourself to concentrate harder. It's built by increasing your tolerance for being slightly uncomfortable without escaping, staying when your mind wants to leave, continuing when it feels boring, awkward, or unimpressive. Most people think they lack discipline. What they actually lack is tolerance. Tolerance for low energy, tolerance for imperfect starts, tolerance for not feeling like the focused version of themselves yet. And this is important. You don't need to believe any of this fully for it to work. You don't need confidence. You don't need certainty. You just need enough steadiness to stay instead of flee. If you feel resistance right now, that doesn't disqualify you. It puts you exactly where change begins. The goal isn't to eliminate doubt. It's to stop letting doubt make decisions for you. Focus grows quietly, not when you feel powerful, but when you choose not to retreat. Not when it's easy, but when you decide that discomfort doesn't mean danger. You're not broken for struggling here. You're learning a capacity most people never train. And like any capacity, it builds not through force, but through repeated, tolerable exposure to the thing you used to avoid.
What you've seen here isn't a productivity trick. It's a shift in how change actually happens. You move from waiting for the right feeling to allowing movement to create the feeling. From chasing motivation to letting momentum carry you forward. From judging yourself for hesitation to understanding why it shows up and not letting it decide for you. And in that shift, something quieter but more important changes. You are becoming the kind of person who starts without needing certainty. The kind of person who doesn't confuse discomfort with incapacity. The kind who trusts small movement more than big promises to themselves. That identity doesn't arrive all at once. It forms through repetition, through choosing to stay when it would be easier to wait, through acting in a way that aligns with who you're becoming, not who you've been. So here's the only invitation I want to leave you with. Pick one thing you've been postponing. Not the hardest one, not the most important one. Just the one that's quietly asking for 5 minutes. Start it today, imperfectly, without fixing your mood first. Then stop. That's enough. No dramatic reset. No pressure to continue longer than you can tolerate. And if this way of thinking gave you clarity or relief, take a moment to reflect on how it changes the story you tell yourself when focus feels hard. If you want to keep building this capacity, you can stay with this channel and continue the journey. You don't need to become someone new overnight. You're already becoming someone different, one small movement at a time.